The reading this morning is taken from John chapter 10, starting at verse 11. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand is not the shepherd and does not own the sheep. So when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. Then the wolf attacks the flock and scatters it. The man runs away because he is a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me. Just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. I have other sheep that are not of this flock. I must bring them to also. They too will listen to my voice, and there shall be one flock and one shepherd. The reason my Father loves me is that I lay down my life, only to take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down and authority to take it up again. This command I received from my Father.
Thanks, Andrea. And just before I get going, as it's the Football World Cup season, I must point out that if my sermon goes on longer than 22 minutes, you are, of course, entitled to a hydration break, okay? No, seriously, if you do need a drink, there is water at the back. Please help yourself. But this morning, as I often do, and for those of you who don't know me, I'm Lee, I'm one of the members here, and I'm also one of the chaplains at the hospital, and I'm also a Baptist minister. But for those of you who do know and heard me preach before, you know that within the church, I like to ask questions. And these questions are not to be necessarily answered, they're just a bit of fun. But what I like to do in a sermon is to make you think. And one of the ways I do that is by asking you questions. Do not worry, there's not going to be a little quiz afterwards or anything like that. But the idea is that by making you think, the sermon and the worship we do on a Sunday perhaps feeds into the rest of your week and the rest of your life. Okay. So I don't want any answers to these questions, but do Tetley Teabag employees have coffee breaks? Do Kenco coffee employees have tea breaks? This is a more philosophical question, but if a man says something in the woods and his wife isn't there, is he still wrong? Have you ever wondered what the speed of lightning would be if it didn't zigzag? If olive oil comes from olives, where does baby oil come from? This one is for all of us who work in healthcare or have anything ever to do with the NHS. But isn't it a bit unnerving that doctors call what they do practice? If the police arrest a mime artist, does he or she still have the right to remain silent? And then finally, my favourite, because we've all done it, but why do you press harder on a remote control when you know that the battery is dead? Daft and silly questions, I grant you, but a question that we must always ask a Bible passage. A question that I always try and answer myself in terms of a Bible passage is, who am I? Who am I? Who am I in this story? in some respects, a philosophical question, but a question that's always good to ask of any Bible passage. Who am I in this passage? Especially in terms of passages like the one that Andrea read out this morning. A fantastic, brilliant passage full of imagery, part of a parable. If you want to read the rest of the parable, then read the first 9 verses of John chapter 10. But a parable which evokes the 23rd Psalm because of the fact that Jesus says that he is the good shepherd. And Psalm 23 starts off with that phrase, the Lord's my shepherd, and then reminds us that the Lord is forever with us in good times and bad. And Jesus reminds us of that and goes even further in John's gospel by telling us that he will lay down his life for his sheep. So whilst we look at this image of the good shepherd, just remember and realize that there are other characters in Jesus' description of himself, of being the good shepherd. And so for this morning, what I want to do is just ask that central question of, who are you in this story? We know who Jesus is because he tells us. But are there other characters within the story that perhaps we can all relate to? Because you see, the first person or character we come across in this parable, apart from the good shepherd, is the hired hand. The hired hand. And the hired hand in biblical times probably referred to the people of Israel's leaders. People who had been put in charge of the sheep, and we'll examine who the sheep are in a few moments' time, but people who have been put in charge of the people by God, given some responsibility, you could say, by the ultimate shepherd. But it's someone who does not own the people, who has no connection with the people, who has difficulty relating to the people. So when trouble comes their way, when the wolf comes, the hired hand runs away and the hired hand abandons the people. And you could say that's the story of politicians the world over. When trouble comes, somehow they manage to avoid it. But what about you? What about you? None of us here are politicians, but all of us, both here in church and outside of church, have been given some responsibility to look after people. Pastoral care, we call it. But where do you think the word pastoral comes from? Well, according to the etymology dictionary that I looked at online, amazingly enough, it comes from the word pastor. No surprise there. Which comes from the French for shepherds, or shepherds of people's souls. And the thing is that all of us have a pastoral responsibility. It's not just down to June, or the deacons, or even my role as a chaplain in the hospital. We all have a pastoral responsibility to everyone sitting here in this building and everybody you know and who probably I don't know. And the thing is, in terms of being a hired hand, are you the sort of person who is a fair weather pastoral carer? Who is there in the good times when things are going well? But when the wolves come, you immediately run away. When things get a bit tricky, your first thought is not to go to someone who is facing trouble, but to keep away. You're not sure what to say. You might make a mistake. You might put your foot in it. And yes, there are people who have more skills in pastoral care than others. And there are times when it's best to say nothing rather than fill the void. But when the going gets tough for someone else, what do you do? And that doesn't mean getting in their face and going round to see them and constantly asking how they are. Part of pastoral care is figuring out what people need rather than what you think they want. And the only way you can figure that out is through God's wisdom. So always pray for people. But secondly, it's also about having a good enough relationship with people so that you know their favorite cake, so you can bake one for them. You know whether they are a talker and they like to talk things out, or whether they are someone who really prefers to be on their own, and you can create that space for them. All of us will this week, this year, in our lifetime, we will face some wolves. We need to rely on Jesus to beat away those wolves, but also he needs some good hired hands to do some of the work for him. And if you ever worry about, I'm going to say the wrong thing, well, in my experience, people don't remember necessarily what you said. People do not necessarily remember what you did, but they do remember how you made them feel. So in terms of our story, are you a hired hand? Or are you in fact a wolf? Well, I say, are you in fact a wolf? When actually the correct question to ask is, are you scared of the big bad wolf? You know the song, who's afraid of the big bad wolf, the big bad wolf, the big bad wolf, who's afraid of the big bad wolf? And then the epic line, tra-la-la-la-la. They are actually the lyrics of the 1933 Disney song involving the three little pigs. But for all of us, and for the hearers of that parable, originally wolves don't necessarily signify a cartoon. Wolves signify something deeper, something darker, perhaps our fears, perhaps real enemies. They certainly did in Jesus' time. Perhaps they signify the Romans or any of the other many invaders of Israel over the years. But in terms of what Jesus the Good Shepherd can protect you from, what are your wolves today? There was an article in the Guardian newspaper a few years ago, and it was entitled Attitudes and Beliefs in Britain. And one of the first questions he asked a sample of 1,000 people in this country was, what are you most anxious about? What are you worried about today? And surprisingly enough, money was the top answer. Cost of living crisis and all that. Yes, for a number of years now, many of us worry about money. Family was second, closely followed by health. Then work pressures, time pressures, and then love life. 15% of those asked said that nothing worried them, or they were anxious about nothing. And whilst many of us worry about world events, and the rhetoric from various right-wing posts is that we are being invaded, actually occupation by a group such as the Romans, I don't think is on the top of many people's worries, as it was for the Jewish people. But I would imagine that all of us at some point have been confronted by the big bad wolf of money worries, family worries, or health worries. But Jesus says that even though you may scatter and you may run away, still I am the good shepherd and I will look after you. I will lay down my life for you. And everyone gets confronted by wolves of whatever nature you care to mention. But how many of us totally and utterly trust in the Good Shepherd without any hesitation? You know, it's a lot easier to sing, and I will trust in you alone, than it is to actually do it. How many of us know our Master's voice and place our whole being in front of him? And for me, it's interesting that Jesus uses the image of the shepherd and the sheep. Today, in 21st century Britain, we have, I think, a very different view of what a shepherd is like. There is what I like to call the romantic view of a shepherd, a sort of 18th and 19th century view of a young man, blue eyes, who wanders across the hillside whistling for his sheep, and they immediately come running. The view of this shepherd is one where the young man has, as I said, blue eyes, blonde hair, ruddy red cheeks, and often carries a young lamb underneath their arm. And when the shepherd are basking nicely in the sunshine and the lambs are frolicking, then the young man will sit on a grassy bank, whip out his flute, and compose either a wonderful poem or a beautiful tune. The alternative view, the more modern view of the shepherd, the, shall we say, countryphile view, is one where a shepherd is an older man, a man who has clearly spent all of his life on the hills, a solitary man, a hard-working man, who goes out in all weathers with his trusty companion of a black and white border collie, rescuing the sheep from 3 foot of snow. And you know what? When Jesus was talking about shepherds, about him being the good shepherd, neither of those views were how people viewed an ordinary shepherd. Not at that time. Shepherds were seen as at best ordinary, at worst not to be associated with. They were smelly, they were uncouth, they were ritually unclean, they earned very little, and in terms of social standing, they were well down in terms of the pecking order. And yet Jesus associated himself with such a person. But he wasn't just any old shepherd. No, Jesus was the good shepherd. And for us, the word good can sound a bit cold or hard, merely a moralistic word. But the word the gospel writer uses can also be translated as beautiful. And that doesn't refer to what Jesus looked like, but it is about the sheer attractiveness of what, as the shepherd, Jesus was doing. When he calls, people want to come to him. When they realize he's died for them, they want to even more. The point of calling Jesus the Good Shepherd is to emphasize the strange, compelling power of his love. A love that is ordinary and extraordinary. But a love for whom? A love for whom? So far, I've asked you what sort of hired hand you are, whether you are pastorally sensitive or not. I've asked you whether you trust in the Good Shepherd, so that when the wolves come and attack us, are you able to deal with those wolves? But finally, the final question I want to ask you is, what sort of sheep are you? There's a question I bet you never thought you'd be asked on a Sunday morning, but what sort of sheep are you? And the reason why I ask such a question is because clearly in our passage, we have 2 types of sheep. On the one hand, we have the sheep that are being looked after by the hired hand. And in Jesus' time, that meant the people of Israel, the people who were already in the fold, already under God's love and care. In other words, for today, people who are part of church life and would consider themselves to be Christians with a full and active faith. People who have obeyed God's call and are Jesus' disciples. People who have been baptized. And clearly, as I said before, as people who model themselves on Jesus, we and me and you have a responsibility to look after those people. And Jesus clearly loves us because we've answered that call. But within the story, there are also sheep who are currently not in the sheepfold, whom Jesus is calling, and at this moment in time have not answered. For whatever reason, they would not consider themselves to be his disciples. And I suppose the last question for today is, where are you? Where are you? I say that's the last question, but that's really not. I don't know why I said that. But the thing is that I know a few people in the church, but I don't know everyone. I'm not the minister. And even if I was, well, you could be inside the sheepfold, you could be outside of the sheepfold. And to be honest, the only people who would ever truly know could be you and God. But what I would say is that even though you may have been coming to this church since time began, if you do not consider yourself to be in the sheepfold, then what's stopping you? Many, many years ago, Helen, my wonderful wife, and I, we used to lead a little discipleship group for young teenagers. It was back when we had a vague sense of energy. And one of the things we did, actually, one of the first things we did was we asked them a very simple question. And you know it's a simple question because there are only three possible answers. And the three answers are yes, no, and thinking about it. And there was about 8 or 9 of these kids aged between 12 and 15. And what we did is we went around the room and we asked them the simple question of, are you a Christian? And as I said, I explained that there would be only 3 possible answers. And we wouldn't mind if they said no. We would be delighted if they said yes. And we would understand if they said thinking about it. And we went round, and for them, it was good to be challenged that way. Now, don't worry. I'm not going to go round and ask you all individually. But I do wonder what you would say. What you would say to yourself, and what you would say, more importantly, to the ultimate, beautiful Good Shepherd. So there you have it. The Good Shepherd. A wonderful passage that creates fantastic images that resonate over the years. And perhaps for you it's a familiar passage. Perhaps it's a passage that you can take with you into this week. Think about your role as a hired helper, a role of responsibility to look after your fellow sheep. Think about the wolves that surround us all. What wolf will you ask Jesus to deal with, to lay down his life for? And then finally, what sort of sheep are you? If you are already part of the sheepfold, then what are you going to do to attract more sheep in? And if you're not, what's stopping you? What's stopping you being under the care of the perfect, beautiful Good Shepherd, our Lord and Saviour, Jesus Christ? Amen. Just before Mark and the rest of the team leads us in our final song, let's just have a period of silence. I've asked lots of questions. So perhaps one question for you just sprung out. Use just a few moments of opportunity to listen to God, where you can ask God all the questions that you want. And maybe, just maybe, he will give you an answer.